Loren Jan Wilson, and he's going to talk about transforming AI and how to empower your data community. I would like to give you the stage, Loren.
Hi, everyone. It is a fantastic experience and opportunity to be speaking at this conference, Reinforce AI. I'm so passionate about this subject matter in general, and especially about the things that I'm about to talk with you about today. This presentation I prepared along with my team, and especially my teammate Monica put a ton of work into this presentation. And so I wanted to give them all a shout out here, Monica, Anna-Pritza, Dan, and Jan. But this talk is about empowering your data community. And it might seem odd that as a keynote speech at an AI conference, I would talk about personal empowerment. So at first, I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think that's so crucial in order to get business value and customer value from data science. So you're probably looking at this slide deck and you're thinking, well, I thought AI was supposed to transform my company and transform my business. Why would I need to transform for AI? So that's what this talk is about. Because you can definitely be an AI and data-driven company in a lot of different ways, right? First, I want to talk about the way in which I think you should not be data-driven. And in order to do that, I'm going to go back into history just a little bit and talk about a band called the KLF. I'm really into music, and in the mid-1990s, a band called the KLF had made a lot of extra money making a #1 hit record throughout the world called The White Room. And they decided that instead of using the money for anything else, the best thing to do artistically would be to burn the money. So they went to some random island and burned 1 million Great British pounds. Now, I think this is art, right? I'm not one of these people who's very stringent about the definition of art. This is obviously performance art. At the same time, I think that if you want to really create value for the world, which is the whole point of artificial intelligence work to begin with, maybe this is not the way to do it. Hiring a bunch of data scientists and then not doing anything valuable with them is just like burning money on an island somewhere. So thank you for allowing me that little history lesson. Big shout out to the KLF. And I've divided this talk into 2 chapters. The first chapter is just talking about the fundamentals of becoming data-driven. And to give you a little hint before we continue, it does not look like the stuff on this page. Right, here's a couple fun memes for you because the kids love memes. And you can't just hire data scientists and expect to get results, right? You can hire data scientists, try to do some cool AI stuff, but your company has to be ready in order to make data science work for you. It's not digital transformation to just have more data scientists on your roster. Here's one way in which, and this is a very common pattern, right? If I were to get called in as a consultant to your company, this is one of the things that I would expect to see. Somebody decided that AI is a really important space and your company should get involved or your organization should get involved. And so you build a new organization of data scientists, but it's totally separate from your core business. And there are a bunch of barriers between those data scientists and their ability to get access to the right data, to build the right data sources, to bring their work close enough to the customer to change your business. Which is the whole point of digital transformation in the first place. So if there are those barriers in place, what are they, right? Why would you hire new people and have them not be able to create value? Here are some of the reasons why. One, and I don't want to go down this list because you can read as well as anyone else, but things that I see the most are, and maybe the #1 thing is, are cultural factors, right? Where for some reason you have a lot of siloing inside your company. This is really common in larger companies where you have a company culture where people are very protective of the data sources, protective of the products that they work on, and they hiring a bunch of new people and a new skill set and just putting them somewhere doesn't get them connected well enough to those people At a place like Ericsson, one of the challenges that we always have is the level of connectedness that is necessary in order to do good work, data science or not, is very high, and there's a lot of overhead with that. You just have to be willing to pay that cost and make those investments in connectivity, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But there are a lot of other reasons too. I think contractual constraints, that's one of the things that people don't really think about as much until the rubber meets the road, as they say, until all of a sudden you're in a situation where people are complaining to you that, yeah, they can get access to a bunch of data, but they're not allowed to use it because of legal constraints. But I'll talk more about all of these barriers. I just wanted to stick them all on a slide so you can see them. This certainly isn't everything, but it's a lot of, these are the main ones that I see. Our team invented we're always inventing terminology for ourselves, but this is a piece of terminology that stuck, and it's data agility. So if a lot of people, when they think, oh, I'm a data scientist in a company, but the data is not good enough, what I need to do is get access to more data, right? If data access is one part of the puzzle, data agility is the other part of the puzzle. You don't want access to data without the ability to do great things with that data. And so that's what data agility is about. How can you take approaches such as the agile organizational mindset and apply that to the way that you collect data and make it available for use? And this is all one long, possibly run-on sentence here that fits together, but there are 7 main points of data agility end-to-end, and that is you need people with the right skill sets working together collaboratively to create customer value, who can access a lot of good data, and the good part of good data is very important, I'll get to that in a moment, that they're allowed to use. That's about the contractual constraints part, with great tools and lots of infrastructure. If you have this stuff and you do this stuff well, then it's very, very likely that you will do, your business will be transformed by AI. That's what I believe very strongly. So here's some of that stuff in the form of a picture. One of the things that I want to point to in this picture is the lower right-hand side, where there are multiple teams here. It's not just one team full of data scientists. It is, in fact, teams that are cross-functional and that can work together. A lot of times, company culture makes it such that it is hard for teams to work together, not because they don't want to, but because certain data sources will be heavily restricted, and so only 1 or 2 people on a given team will get access to that data source, and they will not be allowed to share the work that they do afterwards because whoever the stakeholders are for those products are very sensitive. I am very opposed to that sort of mindset and that sort of structure. I think it just doesn't work. And the larger your company is, the more, as I said earlier, the more important that interconnectedness is. You can also see on the left that there's more going into your data warehouse than just data, right? Or your data lake, or whatever you want to think of this big storage. There's also, you want to have a set of business goals. You want to know you need to know what's important to your business. And you also need to know what's important to your customers. They're willing to fund things that are going to help them, and that's kind of the whole point. So to have a great relationship with them and understand those needs is really, really important. So how can you empower your AI experts to succeed then? And this is just a funny picture showing what is probably a birthday party. I used to do this when I was a kid. Very exciting. Hit the piñata, candy comes out. How can you, whenever you're a kid, you're always like, well, if I didn't have this blindfold on, I could do such a better job of getting this candy. And I think this metaphor applies to AI as well. If you can remove roadblocks or the blindfold, then you can get more candy from AI. Yeah. The whole point of digital transformation is business transformation. But in order to be in a position where you can benefit the most from a technology, a groundbreaking technology like AI, you do need to transform your business, right, as well. You need to transform the way in which you do work in order to have your output transformed. So what are the things that you need to transform? The first one is data, the next one is your systems, and the next one is culture. And I guess these are possibly in an order from, not from most important to least important, but maybe from the most obvious to least obvious. You think, oh, we're doing data science, and if I suggest to you, hey, you're going to need to change the way you think about data, you're going to need to invest more in data, you're going to need to know what's important for you to look at regarding data, that's going to seem pretty obvious to you. And if I mention, oh, by the way, you need some compute platforms that might look very different from the ones that you use today, that's going to seem sort of obvious. But when I say, hey, by the way, also, you're a very hierarchical company, you're going to need to change that, right? That's not going to be so obvious, especially when it comes to empowering value creation. That's a complete mindset change, right? We are going and have gone from a place where we're trying to protect our data and keep it secure to a place where we're trying to empower people to create value from it. And those are not necessarily incompatible mindsets, but there is a trade-off. Whenever there's a trade-off, you must make a value judgment about what's important to your values. What is the core value of your company? And if you want to change, if you want to progress, security is very, very important, but having a purely protectionist mindset isn't going to work. So yeah, and there's more when it comes to this culture stuff too, but one of the things that Monica and I did when we sat around and talked about this was we color-coded the following slides based on each group. So we will go in this order for the next slides, and you can see what you're about to see what I'm talking about. So when it comes to transforming data, the very first challenge and the fundamental challenge here is getting good data. And we are, as Andrew Ng says in a recent interview that I've linked here, we're going from a place where big data is the way to go to a place where good data is the way to go. That it used to be, hey, take all the data you can find and throw it in a data lake, and then your data scientist will just magically figure out what to do. And now we're saying, okay, what are we trying to accomplish with AI? What are we trying to get our model to predict? Can we then create a set of thoughtfully engineered examples of the kinds of things we want to predict, and then feed that as input to the model? And this requires a mindset change about how you think about data, and what the job is of the people who are data scientists and data engineers at your company, and anyone who is data adjacent. So what does good data mean? Data that's good has to be, number one, relevant to your business needs, both now and in the future. If as I point out here at the bottom of the slide, data is expensive to store and maintain, it doesn't make sense to invest if you're not going to use it. And it doesn't make sense to use it unless it's relevant to what your business is trying to accomplish. You have your customers have some set of needs, you have some set of goals. You need to make sure that when you are maintaining data, you're maintaining data that works for you. It also needs to be, as everyone I think who's done data science already knows, it's got to be relatively complete. It's got to be pretty timely. You want it to be pretty fresh. In a lot of cases, you want it to be labeled well, right? You're going to probably have to pay some humans to sit around and say, okay, here is where, if we're trying to build a model that predicts, that tells us whether there are red traffic lights, here's where the red traffic lights are. Thoughtful curation is something I talked about just a bit earlier. And documentation of data sets is, I think, underappreciated in the industry. There are tons of cases where people will take a bunch of data and put it inside a data lake, and there's no documentation anywhere in the data lake. It's just a file system, and you delve into that file system to find things, and who knows what you find. There's a Microsoft initiative, and that is called, I actually don't remember, but it's about creating metadata for data sets. how biased it may be, and they ask a bunch of really good questions inside of the PDF you can download if you click this link. Yeah. So another challenge, once you have good data, and this is a practice that you're always doing, another challenge is clearing the roadblocks for your people. So just because you have data doesn't mean you own it, right? And just because you have access to it doesn't mean you're allowed to use it. So when it comes to things like making an AI platform for people, which I'll talk about in a moment, do your contracts allow you to move data to it? Do you have the right to do what you're trying to do? These are big questions that need answers, and those answers should come very early in the process. Data security is also another thing that I think is that people can always do a better job at for the most part when I talk to them. Not only do you have to figure out what it means to treat your data securely, but you also have to write security rules down in such a way that when I come along and try to work with that data, I can understand how you want me to treat it. And this is maybe a little bit counterintuitive or less likely to come to mind, but it's super, super valuable to have data policies written in a language that people can understand who are not lawyers or not security professionals. And then the last roadblock, which is certainly not least, is that if you have a very siloed organization with regards to your data, if it's like, oh, this department over here owns this data source, this department over here owns this data source, never do they meet or interact, you might have to break those silos down and drive that mind shift I was talking about earlier. From protecting data protectiveness to enabling people to create value. I touched briefly on AI platform on the last slide, and I am very opinionated when it comes to AI platform. I think that for the most part, unless you have done a lot of data science work with an advanced platform, and I'm not going to name them here because I'm not going to give anybody any free advertising, but you know who the hyperscalers are, you know who the big cloud players are, and you know who's making the big popular data science platforms right now, probably. I suggest that you actually go take a look at those. If you're listening right now and you're not a data scientist, but you are somebody who is responsible for infrastructure or responsible for building products for data scientists to use, go run some data science workloads on some of the commercially available AI platforms, and you will see that the breadth of features available on these platforms can be very impressive. There are a lot of companies who invested heavily in public cloud, or private cloud rather than public cloud, who built their own clouds on site. And for many reasons, including data security, this does make sense for people. But you just have to be aware that unless you do it very carefully and invest a lot of resources, the state of your tooling lags behind what's available in the marketplace for pretty cheap today. Right now, if I started a new company, I would not be investing in an internal cloud platform. And if I did, I would also consider generating my own electricity. That's how much sense it makes to me to bother to do that. The main reason is that I don't like to be tied down to capital expenditure, right? And I think the reason for that is I like to pivot, right? If I need to pivot, if I need to go in a different direction from what I knew because I learned a new thing through customer discovery, I don't want to be in a position where I'm waiting for a bunch of equipment that my company bought to depreciate. I want to be able to change fast. If suddenly I need 100 times the machines tomorrow, but then next week I don't need any machines, I want to be able to pay as I go. And I don't want my competitors to be able to pivot faster than I can. Yeah. So here's another thing about systems that I think is so important and so valuable. AI and data science, at the end of the day, when you build a solution, that solution is software. If your company is not a software as a service company, or if your company is a really bad software as a service company and you have a really old tech stack and a lot of technical debt, then you're going to have trouble running AI in production, because running AI in production is running software in production. I suggest that if you're in a position where you make decisions about where to invest, you invest from day one in machine learning operations, site reliability engineers, and just becoming a good software engineering organization. If you have data science teams with just data scientists on them, and of course those people can very often code, but if you don't have them sitting alongside people who can support their workloads in production from the earliest days of building the solution, then a lot of times you're going to end up building things that you can't run, and that's really unfortunate for everyone involved. I want to show you here some pictures of lifecycle management of an AI solution. So if you ever see a picture like this top one, which is a straight line left to right, okay, we're going to develop a model, we're going to train the model, we're going to put it in production, and then we're going to throw a party. That's not realistic, right? Somebody has a lack of understanding about what this really takes. Really, the least that you want to see is a circle, and in this case, a couple nested circles. I don't even like this picture. I found this on the Databricks website, but I'm not a big fan of this picture. It is the best one that I could find, and I didn't have time to make one myself for you, but there are a lot of things even this picture doesn't cover. But my point here is that you're gonna, when you deploy a solution, you're gonna maintain it, and when you maintain it over time, you're gonna keep going back and forth in a circle. Around and around. So yeah, think about things like automation, right? Think about those things from early on. Think about things like having continuous integration pipelines, or think about software testing, right? If your AI solutions are tested very well, the same way that any production piece of software should be tested, then you're going to be in a really great position. Here is a challenge that is near and dear to my heart. Building data community is really crucial and kind of tricky. And I'm going to talk in just another slide about some cases in the industry that we've found where people seem to be doing things really well in this regard. But if you can give people tooling that allows them to collaboratively improve your data and collaboratively improve your models, you'll be in a really good position compared to your competitors. Yeah, and I guess the bigger you are, and this is on the end of the slide, the bigger your company is, the more you're going to benefit from things like asset reuse. If you're making more assets than the average company, if you can reuse those, you can have an exponential benefit. And if you have a company culture where people can't work together effectively, or if you don't invest on the tooling side such that people can see the results of each other's work and share with each other, then you're going to have a really hard time doing this. So here's some industry examples of AI community tools that we've seen. There is an internal hub for collaborating on data science called Pinnacle that's inside AT&T. It's very much like the Google acquired Kaggle community. And what it does is it allows employees to compete on things like feature engineering, model creation, data improvement. And they have seen a good amount of success doing this and for certain use cases. Fraud detection is the one that there's a talk about. So if you take a look around, I didn't link it here, and I probably should have, but there's a talk where they go over what Pinnacle is and how good it's been for them in the fraud detection use case. They also developed a feature store with H2O.ai, and they claim to have seen a lot of time savings. I think these things are hard to measure in reality, but I do know from experience that it is awfully nice to start from past people's work when you're approaching a difficult problem rather than to start from scratch every time. And so the point of sharing feature engineering output is that you can reuse other people's work for model features. And if you don't know what a feature is, it's just the input to a data science model. And at Spotify, they've built an internal data discovery tool called Lexicon, which sounds super awesome. I wish I could get the chance to use it. If anyone from Spotify is listening to this, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I will talk to you about Lexicon and ask you for some more screenshots. The cool stuff about Lexicon are that you don't need to know what you're looking for. If you do know what you're looking for, then you can find something specific. And if you don't know what you're looking for, much like Spotify's product itself, you can search around to figure out, hi, what would be interesting? I don't know, let me look in this sort of genre. What's the genre of data sets that are often used by people who use this tool? It also identifies experts by judging how much you use the tool and what data sets you tend to contribute to. You get various scores when you use Lexicon, and then other people can see the scores. So they say, oh, like Loren is somebody who seems to be very affiliated with this particular piece of data or this feature. So if you want to learn more, or the documentation isn't what it needs to be, you can contact those people. Yeah, so I think that stuff is super cool. There are probably many other examples of things like this, but it's hard to learn about them because the industry is a little bit secretive. When people make internal tools, especially, they don't want to let other people know about it. So this is the most important thing to me, and it's late in the talk, but let's see, why is it important? Let me talk a little to you about just personal autonomy. In a slide or two, I'm going to talk about talent retention. And I think these go hand in hand. Building an agile organization and retaining your people, those things are so interconnected. It is so hard to retain people in data science. Data science moves so fast, right? And any field that moves really fast, people need to stay competitive. And when you need to stay competitive, if you are lacking things like the autonomy to work on what you know needs to be worked on, the freedom to innovate instead of just doing what people told you to do, this is how you retain people. It's not going to be about money, right? If anybody in your organization wants to get rich, they can go work for one of the companies that will pay them 2 or 3 times as much as you can pay them. That's just reality. There's no way around it. So you can't compete on salary. It doesn't make sense to. What you can compete on is providing a fantastic place for your people to work. And if you're great at what you do, there's no reason for you to work somewhere that's going to be less likely to allow you to do what's necessary in order to make your work useful. So what are the fundamentals of agile organizational culture? There is a guide from McKinsey, which I linked to here. I'm not advertising for McKinsey, but it's a pretty good guide. And if you're not comfortable using that kind of link, of course, you can just search like Agile company and Agile teams online and learn more about this stuff if you don't know a lot about it. But the ideas here are that you your management layers focus on adding value to your people, right? Skill set building. Your teams are allowed to go become very, very connected. I talk here about hyper-connectedness. I think I probably made that term up. Very connected inside your organization, and maybe even with people you compete with, and maybe even with your customers. And they are allowed to be internally entrepreneurial, decide what the best things are to do, and go do them. The most important thing you can do to make that happen is create an environment of psychological safety. If you work in a place where, and I've worked in these places before, where people get shouted down if they have opinions that differ from the opinions of management or the opinions of leads, then people will stop talking. And in any place where people stop talking, they're not going to work there very much longer. If you make it unsafe for people to take initiative, people will stop taking initiative. Google did a study for years trying to figure out why do some teams at Google perform really, really well, and why do other teams at Google not perform well? And the number one predictor of a team that performs well is psychological safety on that team. So these are teams where meetings are discussions and instead of lectures, where people are allowed to have differing opinions and express them, and other people will not like shout them down and prevent them from talking. Where it's okay to go explore an idea, and people around you are on your team. They act like they're on your team rather than competing with you for mind share or whatever else it is that people compete for in modern companies. Psychological safety is really important, and often when I talk about these concepts with people, people are fall into one of two groups. One group is people who totally get it. They're like, oh yeah, that's very, very important. And then other people who are like, I don't understand what psychological safety is supposed to mean. So if you're one of the people in the latter camp, please do some research and check this stuff out. This link here to Google's guide explains what the top 7 or 8 predictors are of great teams and outperforming teams. And so check that out. It's a lot of fun. Yeah. So here's a fun picture of what it looks like to build a cross-functional agile data science team. At least this is one way that it can work, right? What you want is a team that most of all is allowed to own its own products. So down here in the lower right, whatever it is that your team makes, you want them to be doing an iterative product development process, Agile, Scrum, whatever, short iteration periods, a month or less. And you want them to own the things that they make. So how are they going to decide what to build? They're going to be in an ongoing dialogue with your salespeople, with your marketing organization, with your customers. And in that dialogue, they're not just going to learn about the needs. They're also going to challenge. And if you're familiar with the challenger sales model, I gave a little shout out here, but the idea is sometimes your customers know what they need to be built, and other times they don't. And the people that you hire, who I'm sure are brilliant, they need to be allowed to provoke the customer into thinking in different ways. And then there are all these parts of the organization that are going to need to collaborate with the data science team in order to make them really effective, including all your product development areas and perhaps other companies, right? And this is maybe controversial, but the reason why I say, hey, you might need to collaborate with your competitors, open source is the reality now. And that's exactly what open source is intended to do, to take work that you are doing internally to your company and externalize that work such that you can get things done in a different way. Your competitors can help you a great deal, and I think a rising tide lifts all boats, as they say. Yeah. So the last thing, of course, is that this team, as I pointed out earlier, this team is multifunctional. And this is because things are so complicated when it comes to a field like data science that not one person ever has the total set of skill sets. This is a team discipline. So understanding that and allowing people to self-organize, to say, oh, well, look, we need this person, we need to pull that person in. Maybe that person becomes a part of the team for a month or 6 months or forever. That's gonna get you a lot better result than deciding where your people should be based on who their next level manager is or whatever. That this stuff is a lot of times going to be cross company work, and that's why this slide looks the way it does. Yeah. So okay, I have an itchy slide trigger finger. So I talked a little bit about this, so I don't need to go back over it. But I do want to point you to this fantastic dog comic, which is so often used in the industry among people with sarcastic sense of humor, such as myself. You don't want to just get good people. You want to provide an environment where those people can feel like they are doing work of value, where they can contribute, where they, at the end of the day, they're like, I'm proud of what I did at that organization. And that's what's going to make people stay. The larger your company is, the harder it is to stay connected with the other people who are doing great stuff in the organization. It does cost money, and you should be happy to pay that money. You should be incredibly happy to be fortunate enough to have a bunch of people who are really smart working together, even in ways that you didn't predict, ways that you can't control. Getting yourself out of the control loop as a general manager is part of what makes Agile work so well. And those people, they will learn what they need through trying to do work and trying to create value for your customers, and they will build an ecosystem for themselves if you let them. If you have a lot of bureaucracy that's getting in the way of people building their skill sets, well, data science is constantly changing. People always have to stay sharp, right? If your culture is standing in the way of them staying sharp, it'll be really hard to talk them into staying, no matter how much money you offer them. So I am incredibly passionate about this. I'm sure that it shows, given my tone of voice. And I really do think that it's fantastic. That company culture comes first. Organizational culture is the most important thing to focus on to build great teams that do great work, data science or otherwise, but especially in a field like data science. So yeah, that's what I have to say. So at the end of this presentation, I've given you just a recap here, and these are the things that I went over, the 7 challenges that I went over just now in order. This is a one sheet that you can use to think about this stuff in the future if you need a refresher. If this is important to you, if this resonated with you, feel free to take this and use it. I will find some way to distribute the slides to all of you. And the last thing that I made, and this is going to look really overwhelming, so don't worry about the boxes, the content of the boxes, but this is a one-page guide on how to build data agility in your organization. It talks about, in each row, each of these general concepts in this very, very content, maybe too content-packed talk that I just gave. And there's a column of coaching questions to start with, a column of the challenges you're likely to run into, and then helpful tips on how to move forward there. And what I hope is that if you're watching this, your company becomes a company that does data science super, super well, even better than you do now, even if you do it really well today. And if you're thinking about dipping your toe into the water, these are the things that you need to ask yourself in order to decide what it means for your company to do AI and to be transformed by AI. And so I wish you all the best of luck with that. And if you need any help, reach out to me or anyone on my team, and we'd be happy to talk with you. So thank you very, very much. And I look forward to your questions. Oh, and by the way, our team is working inside Ericsson in Gaia, which is the global AI accelerator. And our team is right now referred to as the data agility team, which I feel pretty proud of. So thank you. Thanks very much.
Well, Loren, thank you very much for your presentation. I think that was very insightful. Not only did you touch all the issues around data availability, but also about culture, about agility, and about how to build a team that is actually motivated to work for a company. I have a few questions to you, and then I will shortly, because we still have some time left, so then we will follow up with a few questions from the audience.
Great.
Could you explain to me a little bit about what your view is about synthetic data? Because you touched the point of data availability, but what about synthetic data, which is a new trend within AI?
Yeah, so, okay, I have strong opinions about synthesizing data and about using things like test labs. This stuff is very common and has been common in Ericsson. I think Ericsson is probably one of the pioneers of building internal systems for creating data. Here's what I think. If you talk to people who do data science for a living, they're always going to tell you, look, I need real data, right? And I think in a lot of cases, they're right. That said, if you're putting a lot of thought into creating good data sets for particular use cases, it is possible to build a simulator that can create the kind of data you're looking for. So let me try to give an example. Imagine a case where you have a manufacturing plant and there's a particular flaw in the raw materials that you could potentially identify using pictures of those raw materials. So if you take logs in, you want to find knots or something on the logs. Forgive me, I'm not a woodworker. But in order to find those, you could take a bunch of pictures of a bunch of wood and then hope that it turns out. That's the big data approach. Or you can find specific examples of what it is that you want to train your model to identify and then just use those. And if you can't find enough pictures of knots and logs, you can then build a synthesizing engine to create fake pictures of logs, but real enough such that those particular flaws you're looking for can be identified by the model. So in that case, I do believe that synthesizing data works well, but I think it has such a high cost that I would want to exhaust all of my other options before I go do that. So I think in any case where you just you happen to have like some sort of simulator around and you're hoping that the output of that simulator is going to help you build the model, it's probably not. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, because it's a personal reflection. I work in the fintech industry, of course, And one of the
Yeah.
big issues in the fintech industry is that we want to work on sensitive data, real-life customer data, usually belonging to banks, which cannot be distributed. And right now there's a trend going on that synthetic data might be able to solve this. So, and I wanted to ask you one other question before I go to the Q&A, because we have quite a few questions in, and we have some time left.
Sure.
How do you feel about the startup culture versus the corporate culture in terms of maintaining, let's say, motivation amongst data scientists? Do you feel that there's a problem there? Do you feel that the startup world, or perhaps let's say the not corporate world, where are the difference? Where do you see that?
So I have worked at some startups, and I have worked now at a couple large organizations. I used to work for the U.S. government, and I work for Ericsson now. And it is what I've tried to do in my own work, and I know this isn't a direct answer to your question, but what I've tried to do is bring an entrepreneurial and startup style mindset inside of a big company. And I have had mixed success with this approach. I think a lot of times anyone who is internal to a company who is going against the grain is going to have a harder time. It is a challenge that I've continued to accept, and I continue to work at Ericsson, and I love Ericsson as a company. It's meaningful for me to work there. I believe in the mission. There's a good values alignment. But when I look back at the things that I personally am most proud of in my career, it was at the startups. So I think for part of the big challenge for a larger organization is to create that feeling of unlimited upside for the work that you do at a place, at a large company. That's one of the biggest challenges I think that I come up against every single day, just as a team lead, is making an environment such that when the people on my team can, when they do work, they feel like, wow, this could become a really big thing. This could become a new line of business for Ericsson, or this could become something that will touch a lot of people's lives positively. It's very challenging to do that. I don't think there is a straightforward answer about those differences, but this is why you see new companies all the time show up and just eat the lunch of more established companies. It is the spirit of entrepreneurship. That's what I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. If you can create an entrepreneurial environment, let's say in a big organization where you make people feel like they have ownership over their direct impacts, I think that can be a very strong motivator to be effective as a team. So I'm totally aligned with you on that. One question from the audience. Well, we have a few questions. These human aspects are so obvious, at least to me, coming from an organization design. HR it is still a challenge in this lens at the heads of decision makers with budgets and influence. How we could put high human aspects, culture, psychological safety in the high-tech environment?
I mean, it's almost, I mean, I feel like the answer is too simple because the thing that comes to mind is so brief to say. So I need to come up with more words so that I sound important or smart. But technology is about people at the end of the day. It's technology for technology's sake is not important. It is all about people. Any tech company is a social organization. Anytime you use technology, anytime you make new technology, you're doing it to help the world. And I think having a people-focused attitude and a people-focused mindset, and intentionally defending your cultural values, these are things that you cannot leave to chance if you want to help people. And yeah, I think we do get caught up. I mean, I'm an engineer by trade, right? Like I've been an engineer for 20 plus years. I'm not a people person naturally, and I have had to work very hard to get out of a place in my brain where I just want to sit down and code and I don't want to be bothered. So, I think tech self-selects the kinds of people who don't want to think about people issues, but companies that excel do a very good job at the people issues. Yeah. So it's a combination of factors. Yeah.
Yeah, but it seems that you made the journey. So going from just wanting to go down, but to really also coaching your team and your people with Ericsson to reach higher goals with each of each other. That's another good question I received from the audience, which I found quite interesting myself, coming from the banking industry. In your opinion, what is the amount of information you were able to share with your competitors?
I am highly transparent as a person. That's just my personal bias. That in any case in the past where there was a situation where I could keep a secret and keep something obscured from my competitors or from my teammates or from people that I work with, and I chose to obscure it, the outcome was never very good. That on average, I think being really transparent about the challenges you face and being willing to talk about them, even with your competitors, I think is always gonna bear fruit. But like, your competitors are people too, right? There are now. All that said, I also believe in stealth mode. So yes. So if you're an early stage startup and you believe that your idea is something that you don't want someone else to take and steal from you and get there first, then okay, you can stay in stealth mode. But a lot of times, the people who succeed are not people who stayed quiet for the longest. They're the people who are the most active in a community, right? If you try to find, and this goes back to that Google study that I linked to. One of the predictors of a successful team is their level of connectedness inside your company, right? I think that extends to outside the company. I think people who are connected very well in the industry at large, they're able to, if you have a great culture and people are more likely to hear about it, you can pull them into your company. So yeah, throw your competitors off guard by sharing information with them. That's how I do it.
That's a very, very good takeaway for today for myself. I also used to work closely with competitors, but more in the core banking space, so very different from the industry that you are working in.
Yeah.
Another challenge I got from the audience is, what kind of challenges do you find with marketing when it comes to these kind of technologies within your team? How do you market your products? What are the main obstacles that you see?
So, I mean, my team we're focused on internal tooling for Ericsson as to become a better AI company. And the biggest challenge we have when it comes to marketing is that things from outside the company move at a faster rate than things inside the company. So, if we identify a problem and we try to build a piece of tooling to help fix that problem, by the time we're done doing that, even if we can do it within a few months, probably some external company, some small startup has come up with something that would have been cheaper for us to just buy. And when people are data scientists and they come into a place like Ericsson, a lot of times they're coming from a place where they had a lot more freedom about the tooling that they could use and a lot less constraints on the data that they're working with. And once people taste that freedom and taste that tooling, it is very, very difficult to say, oh, but now you work at Ericsson, so use this horrible thing that my team built or whatever. But we build great things, so it's not horrible. But the biggest problem we have with marketing is it's not telling people about what we have. It is like staying competitive in that space. It all moves very quickly. There's new tooling all the time. And deciding what to build that's going to not just be a carbon copy of another thing, but worse, is a challenge. So I hope that answers the question. I know it's a little bit of alongside what you're actually asking about, but pure marketing challenges aren't something that we're lucky enough to not have to deal with that as a team.
Yeah, very clear. I mean, like in the past, especially in the early 2016 and 2015, there was a lot of buzz about artificial intelligence really changing the world. And just before I answer a few questions from the audience, I would like to ask you directly, like, how do you see AI, or perhaps just call it machine learning? Did it really change our lives? Is the YouTube algorithm that's smart? Is all the predictions about massive job losses due to automation, is it going to happen or is it not going to happen?
So, I am a bit of an older person now, I guess. And so, but I've always been both a technology worker and quite a Luddite when it comes to how technology will change human nature. I am not one of these people. So Misha Dolar yesterday gave a fantastic talk that I watched, and Misha's also an Ericsson employee, and it was very forward-thinking, and it was about AI, the possibility of an AI singularity, and I love hearing about that stuff. At the same time, I myself am super conservative when it comes to the possibilities of AI. I think that it is changing. I think it has changed our lives, and I think the way in which it changes your lives, it's going to slip under the radar to you, that it's going to be so subtle that you, by the time the change has happened, you wouldn't have noticed that it had occurred. Let me give you just one really quick example, something that has affected my life a huge amount, and is very AI driven. I think the rise of social media since about like 2007, in the post Facebook era, the post Friendster era, I guess, post MySpace, the time that people spend in those apps to scratch their internal need to be part of a community versus the time that they spend reaching out to their friends and having meaningful one-on-one engagements, it has radically changed. And it changed in such a way that people just kind of took it for granted and didn't really think about how that might change your ability to live a fulfilling life. And that was done with the help of AI. Without the AI models inside of those things, they wouldn't be as addictive. They wouldn't be as likely to cater to your interests and keep you there, interacting in the app and being advertised to. And now this is becoming a very political statement. But when I look at that, I'm like, yes, AI does change people's lives. But you can see that it might not be for good all the time. That said, I would love to see self-driving cars happen. So
yeah, well, that's a very good point actually, because recently I watched a video where it was perfectly explained how the YouTube algorithm actually creates like the misinformation dilemma that people are facing, because it just keeps recommending videos that are similar to what you're currently looking for. Me as a psychologist, it's quite interesting to see that what AI is actually capable of doing of. And hearing your words about the subject is, I think, very relevant to this conference, because the ethical side of AI needs to be touched.
And
especially
crucial.
Given the current situation that we all know about misinformation, about deep fakes, and about more. Where do you see the future of this industry going to? Like, from an Ericsson point of view, where are we going to be in 5 years, let's say?
I mean, there's certainly, like, since I try to be a realist, it's like, well, here's where I see Ericsson going, but separately, here's where I want to see Ericsson go, and I think that's kind of like my talk is as forward thinking as it is current. There are things that were in my talk that Ericsson does super well, and there are things that Ericsson needs to do better at. The mission and the wanted position for Ericsson, and this is not me speaking for Ericsson, I really just speaking for myself and what we've seen inside the company. Ericsson wants to be data-driven, is passionate about getting data-driven, and to apply that to connectivity, to human communication in the globe, right? I mean, and this is a really difficult thing to do. So in 5 years, I would love it if we were a lot closer to that reality. And I know that's where Ericsson wants to go. But what exactly the implications are for that work, I don't know. And I can't say, I mean, right now 5G is the big thing, right? And we're using AI to drive aspects of 5G. When 6G is the thing, and that's part of what Misha was talking about yesterday, are we going to see AI take a role in not only configuring your networks and making them zero touch, but also actually defining what it means to have a network, designing your network, doing things like, I don't know, automated reconfiguration of the kinds of things Misha was talking about. I don't know that we're going to get there or not. You asked, this question is related to the last question you asked, and the part I didn't touch upon, which is, do I think jobs are going to go away? And I think that's very related, right? How much of this will become AI driven and automated? And I started as a network security person, a network engineer, and people kept saying that job would go away, and it keeps being there. And now it's been It's been 25 years since I started. So I don't know where Ericsson is going to go, but I know where, I think I understand intuitively where they're trying to get from a very high level. And I do support the mission. I just don't know what it's going to mean. I really don't.
That's a very good key takeaway. I will just resolve a little bit because we have a few minutes left. So
sure.
You mentioned challenges to get data, to solve data usage, roadblocks, deploy AI production, and so on. What is the most time-consuming part for you? Is that knowledge, or is it creativity? And can you perhaps elaborate a little bit, because that's also interesting for myself. What are the biggest challenges when you run into silos, when data is not structured enough?
Yeah, the biggest challenge that we run into, if I can be totally frank to a room of who knows how many people, the biggest challenges are, I wouldn't call it, let me call it reconfiguring bureaucracy. That's, if there is a silo in place, a lot of times there are really good reasons for that silo to be in place. And giving people an opportunity to see what would be possible. Because at the end of the day, this is about people compromising on some of their deeply held beliefs so that they can take advantage of new technology and new ways of working. That's the biggest thing we come up against, and we come up against it constantly. What are some tricks that we've used, that we've tried to use to break down some of those silos? I think case studies can be super powerful. I think if you can do just a little bit of work in a different mode and then bring it back to people after 3 months and say, look, here's what we were able to do if we could just change this and this and this, or make these slight modifications to the way in which we've structured our process, or the way in which people work together. That can be a lot more powerful than just going and knocking on the door repeatedly until people tell you whatever they're going to tell you. So that's, I guess that's a very startup-y kind of mindset, a very entrepreneurial mindset, right? What can you do agile in a very short amount of time to prove out some of the assertions you're trying to make regarding how your organization should change culturally? I think that's a great thing to have in your ability, in your skill sets, is the ability to demonstrate to people what works and to do it quickly, so that you don't have to spend a lot of time investing in something that isn't going to make sense for you anyway. Sometimes your intuition is wrong, so it's better to find out early. Yeah.
So that's a good answer. And one question from my side, before we have a few more left from the Q&A. There is this mantra in the software industry in general, an API is secure for everything. So we can somehow connect an API to another API and it will magically work itself out. In reality, the thing is that an API is just another mouth speaking to another mouth in a different language and need to understand each other. Do you believe that this whole API-driven mantra that is kind of floating around the whole industry or the tech industry in general, do you believe that an API is a cure for everything?
No.
Yeah, good.
No, so, I mean, without speaking too much about the internal politics at Ericsson, let me instead talk about a different place that I worked, because then that's all fair game, right? I worked at a place that, it was a startup, we did go public. One of the problems they had, something that I saw was a problem that they didn't necessarily see as an architectural problem, was this. They had multiple systems they had designed that all did pretty similar stuff, and instead of choosing a path and going with it and migrating people to just one system so they had less to support, they decided what they'd do was build an API in front of each part, and then make all the APIs talk to each other. And I don't know what you call that approach, whether it's like distributed chaos or like some sort of dream that you can federate the world if you just put enough APIs out there. That totally was not working. And I don't work there anymore. It's been several years, so I don't know if it's working yet or whether they've decided to change it. But I don't think one size ever fits all, right? I think there are a lot of cases where having a heterogeneous environment makes more sense. But sometimes having an API helps you, sometimes it doesn't. Let's be realistic about about whether we're just wasting our time by creating architecture diagrams, right? That I like to see practical things. I like to see things that work. I like to see real demos. I'm not really into like this. I don't think you can put another layer of architecture, another layer of abstraction on top of absolutely everything, and that the world becomes a perfect place. That's just not my personal bias.
I think that's a very good key takeaway. Then one last question from the audience. It's also a long one, but we have a few minutes. How would you see technology of AI in comparison to other technological revolutions in the past in terms of the level as we are able to understand possible downsides and dangers of it? While an invention like TV, for example, is quite easy to guess the outcomes in society, it's much harder with AI because developing can sell it soon on its own. What's your opinion? And I think this also relates to the question from the audience about the Andrew Ng article that you mentioned. And there's been a lot of talk about ethical dilemmas to AI. So if your last key takeaway can be on this, then I think the audience will be satisfied.
Wow, will I be satisfied? There's, it's so much fun to think about this kind of stuff, and at the same time, it's maybe a little dystopian. Some of the things that my imagination can run away with, but for me, the key difference between, so everybody's always afraid of new inventions, right? Like myself included. But the key difference between something like the television or the automobile and something like data science, I think is I think it's the feedback loop, right? I think where if you can, I don't necessarily believe that we're going to create some sort of like sentient AI super intelligent being, but the fact that your behavior is part of the input to the system, the input to the prediction, that the output that you receive, your behavior went into the input to create that output, that makes it very different from television. The feedback loop was always much longer for television. It's there, right? Were these things where you saw over in like the 1970s, where all of a sudden people's accents across a country as large as the United States, for example, all kind of normalized a little bit more based on the influence of television shows, popular television shows. The like terminology and water cooler conversations started to be about the things you would see on TV or influenced by it. That feedback loop was just so much bigger than the feedback loop of, oh, I'm like scrolling in YouTube and my video recommendations are changing. And I think if you take that concept about feedback and about the fact that you are becoming part of that product and your behavior is influencing that product, that makes AI maybe a little bit more dangerous than other technologies, other human inventions. But it's probably not the most dangerous human invention, and it can be harnessed for good, unlike some of the things that we've built as a society. I don't know. I mean, that's the kind of thing. No? Yeah, that's the kind of thing that I spend too much time lately thinking about, and I think like anything that humans do, if we do it with good intentions and with kindness towards our fellow people at heart, then we can make it great. And if I didn't believe that, I would change careers if I didn't believe that. Yeah.
I think that's a perfect key takeaway for today. Loren, may I thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you. It's been so much fun.
The Q&A was excellent. And
thank you.
We're all going to be sending you your picture.
That's fantastic.
Yes, and it will be sent your way.
I will hang this on my wall forever.
To do the poll about how they liked the presentation, and it would be excellent if you can share the presentation with us post event. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much.